speak boldly. You get 2 minutes on the microphone, speak boldly. You never know where the Lord's going to open the door next. I had no desire or passion, or I had no like ambition to get into politics. I should say. It's just that.
Well, welcome back to Civically Minded, where I give you practical theology for everyday life. As always, I'm your host, Corey Wing. Did you know that all of my interview segments are now being added to my audio podcast on Apple and Spotify? Simply search for Civically Minded and enjoy solid Christian content on your long commute, while you're at work or the gym, or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. And be sure to tell a friend how they too can enjoy Civically Minded. And if you enjoy my content, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. My guest today is a devoted husband to his wife of nearly 10 years, Molly, and a father of 4 children. He's a passionate writer of Christian fiction novels, as well as the co-author of The Father's Mantle, a blog that he shares with his friend Arthur West. They've also written a book called Tales of Calaveria, A Trial of Kings, and it's a bold Christian medieval action adventure series designed to inspire young men and their fathers by confronting cultural idols and rekindling the Christian imagination. But JT doesn't merely write about civic engagement, it's also something in which he has been actively a participant. With over 8 years of experience in elected politics, he has served in various local and statewide roles, and he's deeply committed to mobilizing Christians to actively take part in the political sphere, an arena that, if we're honest, is too often neglected by Christians. He sees an immense potential for the next generation of men to faithfully uphold the Dominion mandate through political engagement. So I am honored to have who has become my friend, JT Knox, to Civically Minded. Welcome, JT.
Thanks, Corey. Glad to be here. Looking forward to talking with you.
I've been looking forward to kind of catching up as just friends, and then also exposing my audience to a guy that is, honestly, the more I've gotten to know you, quite a kind of Renaissance man. You know what I think historically in Christian circles, especially, there were a lot of guys that, dabbled in a number of different, venues, and then we've kind of become boring over the years. And so you remind me of some of the guys that I've, kind of looked up to and read about, and just what Christian men from other eras have been like, which is to say, and I don't say this to blow smoke, I'm being honest, which is to say that they've been, politically engaged, they've been husbands and fathers. Usually they were artisans of some kind, or ran small, family owned businesses, or a homestead of some kind, or something like that. And the fact that you get to do a lot of your writing with one of your oldest friends, one of your best friends, what a cool project that is as well. For those watching, if some of you may not know, JT asked me to be involved in a small project that he was pretty passionate about a couple months back, and another good friend of ours named Parker Brown, who's the host of the Watch Well podcast. The three of us got to collaborate on a pretty cool project that JT was spearheading, and I'm grateful that I got to be a part of that. It's a very important topic, kind of about invasion, which is a big topic these days. I mean, I'm just outside Charlotte, and ICE is currently here. We were the next city on the list. So Operation Charlotte's Web is literally happening as we speak. There's
Wow.
ICE agents all over the greater Charlotte area, doing their thing. So yeah, it's a real deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love to be in that. That was such a blessing to have that project. And I think that's what's so important about, as Christians kind of permeate into their surrounding communities, whether it's, online or if you go to shows of any sort, or the Lord brings people into your life who have different skill sets and different stories that you do. And then being able to work together side by side, harmonizing with those other Christians to build something that would ultimately, we all are seeking to glorify Him in what we're building. I can't encourage Christians to do that enough. I think it's a missed opportunity because, like you said, I get it from one extent. You want to be really, really competent at good and at one thing in one lane. But I think that you can also kind of spread your wings a bit, especially if you have like-minded brothers around you that kind of there's some overlap, there's a different skill set, and the Lord just uses the tools that He gave each man to build something great. And that project was just a perfect example of that. I loved it.
Likewise, I was honored to be a part of it, and hope we can collaborate on stuff in the future. Certainly. Um, so before I want to be transparent, I really want to spend most of our time today, because of kind of the thrust of what I do as a channel, and just kind of what my heartbeat is as a man, but also
Mhm.
because I think we're in a very unique moment in American history. Um, Post Charlie Kirk, kind of what happened a few months ago with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and how that has spearheaded a kind of a broader narrative and movement in the wake of all of that. So I'd love to spend most of our time talking about um, your involvement in the political sphere, and then kind of your encouragement to other Christian men of how we can become more engaged and more involved. But before we kind of jump into that world, um, do share with my audience a little bit about what you've done in not only just the first book, but kind of the starting of this series of books that you and your co-author are writing, and what your hope is there. And again, it reminded me when I read through it of some of the types of books that we as Christians have loved for a long time, whether that's again C.S. Lewis or Tolkien, or those types of works where we get to kind of utilize our holy imagination, but it's not completely divorced from some greater Christian reality, and that's the world in which it's superimposed. So I mean, it reminded me of a lot of those great works, which is again, I realize sounds exceedingly flattering, and I don't intend it to, other than I thoroughly enjoyed it and thought it was again very much in the vein of those types of works.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And yeah, it was an interesting thing. I didn't actually think that I would end up getting into writing Christian fiction. I mean, if you ask me, I was saved. The Lord saved me in my mid 20s to later in life. I didn't grow up in the church. I think it definitely informs my writing because I spent a good portion of my adult life not saved and in those secular pagan circles. And so I kind of understand thoroughly the myths that they want you to believe, and then it comes out in my writing. And so I think, as we all say, the Lord uses all things for His good and His purposes. And so I think it's reflected in the writing, and that's what I how it started was I just kind of started making up stories for my sons in particular, my daughter as well. I have 4 children. Oldest is 7, and youngest is 3 months. So I just started creating my own bedtime stories. Really, I just wanted to create stories that would instill virtues in them that I wanted them to take away and start conceptualizing at a very young age. And it kind of, I'm very grateful for a lot of the Christian content that's out there, but I just saw kind of a void in, I would say, over sugar coated content. It's over bubble wrapped and a little bit too nice. I mean, even in the journey of getting this book published, I had publishers that said, "Hey, love the story, but it's a little graphic on some of the fight scenes, and we don't have our readers. We can't have that in our portfolio." And I'm like, well, the world's kind of a graphic place. The world's kind of, especially towards Christians. If you take Ren's framing of negative world and how the world views Christians, it's, to your point, Charlie Kirk was martyred. He was killed for being a Christian, speaking truth in for his faith. Um, and so I just think my friend and I, Arthur, felt just convicted that like our stories we tell our children matter, and they need to reflect the time in which they're going to be raised in. So I have a copy of it here for anyone who wants to see it. But Tales of Calvary, Trial of Kings, and it's just the general overview of it is it's a Christian kingdom that is unapologetic in its loyalty and fealty to Christ in a realm surrounded by pagan kingdoms, and all the tension takes place in those two worlds colliding. So we wanted to write stories that would actually confront things that our children are going to face, lies that the secular world wants to make our children believe and hijack them to steer from the faith. And I think we've seen that time and time again. To the left's credit, I think they understand that more than Christians do, that stories matter and the narrative we tell our children matter, and it will inform them of what they think about themselves. And I think A good example I use is like a popular show. I've watched a few episodes of it, and I'll never get those hours of my life back. But Modern Family, the character of the patriarch in that story, one of the patriarchs, and I don't know his name, but he's indistinguishable from the gay couple, and that's by design. That is specifically trying to have men be emasculated to kind of this androgynous state of weak, feeble leadership, but really the woman's leading in the home, and kind of pacify any strength and biblical courage that we want our boys and men to become. So that was the hope for this book, was to kind of, through narrative, win the hearts of our children to see that following Christ will give opposition. You will face opposition, and it will not be bubble wrapped. It will be ugly. But the finished work of Christ is good news, and they can stand bold and firm in that finished work and march on to be obedient to the dominion mandate, and by extension the Great Commission, that we can rest that it's finished, it's not on us, but that Christ instills a duty into us to go forth. And so we really wanted to capture that in fiction, and be very, very allegorical, and tie our children to see that it reflects the conditions in which the world they're actually going to live in as they become adults. And I think that's what we endeavor to do.
Well, and again, I think you did a great job pulling that off. And to your point, I think we have a nasty habit as Christians to whitewash and kind of antiseptic everything, right? I mean, it's I've been preaching, and I preach again on Sunday, and I'll be starting in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 on Sunday. So I've been preaching through the book of Ecclesiastes just because Presbyterian church, and so we just kind of march through scripture, in exegetical fashion. Yeah, so
Mhm.
there's no hiding anything. You just, all of the books that a lot of preachers either just skip entirely, or maybe they try to bypass. We just don't get that luxury, because we just
Yep.
kind of unapologetically march through the Bible. And so I've been
Yep.
preaching through Ecclesiastes, and one of the complaints that I often hear about that book in particular is, well, it's almost too honest. It's just it's a hard read, and it is a hard read. I mean,
Yeah.
Solomon he is not sugarcoating anything. He's very upfront about the bad choices that he's made. And it's very autobiographical, and he's just saying, "Hey, son, I made all of these mistakes. Learn from all of the various mistakes that I make." And then, of course, the book's about is only 12 chapters, and he ends that 12 12th chapter, and ends the whole book really with fear God and keep his commandments. He kind of wraps it all back around to, if I could give you anything from this story of kind of, um, cautionary tale that became Solomon's life, unfortunately, it's don't do what I did. Fear God and keep
Mhm.
His commandments. And so I think that there are wonderful lessons, certainly for the believer to learn in, say, the life of Christ, or in the lives or biographies of wonderful Christians who lived these almost puritanical, almost spotless existences. You think about Joseph in the Old Testament and others that you're like, I'm sure he was a sinner. I mean, because everybody except Jesus has been, but man, I sure don't see a whole lot. But there's
Yeah.
also wonderful lessons to learn from the grimiest of stories, where we kind of go, yeesh, there was a lot of mess there, but man, if you'll let it, it'll teach you something. So I appreciate that kind of raw, and especially with boys. I've got, two girls and a boy, and especially with my son, those are the stories they need. I mean, that because boys have a really wonderful way of kind of sniffing through the BS, and kind of understanding that the world is not as clean as you're trying to make me believe it is, Dad. And so I think that it really strikes a very good balance, especially for young men and their fathers, which is kind of what I said in the intro, that you're some of your target audience there. So thanks for such an incredible work. Do you plan on having follow ups? In that world, is that kind of the first of a series, or what's the plan for kind of medium to long term there?
Yes, there's a this is the first in the series, and I thought now in kind of the framing and work I've done so far, it has been slightly halted lately because, like I said, my youngest is 3 months, so there's a little pause on the writing time right now, but that's okay. And I wouldn't have it any other way. It is a series though, and we're thinking it'll be a 3 book series, possibly 4. And then there's also another works that I'm going through that is more in alignment, let's say, with the project you and I did, this in fiction
Mm-hmm.
form. So I'm pretty excited about that as well. That's an area of passion for sure. The sneak peek, but those are kind of the 2 lanes in the fictional world that we're writing in.
Well, and again, you're in the great state of Texas. I live here in North Carolina, and our two states kind of very different. Your state has remained, pretty resolutely red. And I know every election cycle we're told it won't, if, oh, Texas is going purple, but not even purple. It's probably going to go blue. Of course, Beto
Yeah.
O'Rourke was famously going to turn the state blue. And then of course he could barely like change his own shirt. He was an idiot. What a
But he can
waste of
skateboard. He can skateboard.
what a waste of a politician. But
Yeah.
and then but with every election cycle, we're told that Texas is radically changing. North Carolina, on the other hand, actually has in many ways. I mean, we are a firmly purple state, and when my family moved here in late 1989, early 1990, um, it was red. It was red.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, you go back, say a decade or maybe 15 years prior to that, and it was blue, but it was blue in the way of what was called old Southern Democrats, which is not the Democrat Party of today. It's very,
Yeah.
very different. Um, Tennessee Valley Authority. I mean, there were
LBJ.
problems. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly,
LBJ. Yeah.
exactly. Very different Democrat Party back then. Now there were seeds of what has become the Democrat Party even back in the LBJ era. A lot of the government handouts, the social programs, again, TVA being one of them. Um, there were a lot of they were just starting to flirt with that world, that kind of socialistic framework. Um, but it's been weird to live here in a state that has so radically went from Southern Democrat to hard red to now purple. And we've got at times super majorities in the state legislature that are Republican and then a Democrat governor. And you're like,
Hmm.
how does that
How did
work?
that happen?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You kind of shake your head going, what in the, but like so many states, it's a fight between the rural communities and the and the cities. And now that Raleigh Durham has grown significantly, the Charlotte Mecklenburg area, of course, is now a huge metroplex. And then what they call the Greensboro High Point area, or the Triangle, the Triad, and Charlotte, are kind of the three big metroplexes in our state. And those population centers, have at this point, and Asheville too. Asheville's very, very progressive up in the mountains. So you get with those areas, they've turned us from very, very red to firmly purple. But I bring all that up to say both of our states are also kind of going through something that's it's kind of a microcosm of what's going on in the country. But I think our states are finding themselves kind of almost at the center of some of these fights. You guys have a huge influx of Muslims for one, but also of Indians. Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
famously, Houston now has this huge Hindu statue. Like the third largest statue in America down in Houston, and here in North Carolina, there's been recent plans that have just kind of come to public knowledge that the Hindus have purchased like 130 acres or something here in the state, and are going to build a gigantic temple. And again, another huge statue, which will be taller than the Statue of Liberty, I'm told. Um, so when we talk about something as foundational as like immigration, and
Yep.
that really has become such a political football, I think the average American, forget American Christian, even just American, boilerplate American non-believing, maybe even agnostic, they don't realize how much culture is shifting underneath their feet. When you add that secondary layer of Christianity on top of it, where now you're saying, I don't think the average American Christian sees what's happening, that it's not something as simple as, I love Indian food. I do love Indian food, by the way. I love Indian food, and I think Indian people are hard workers and they're really sweet people. And, so why should I mind that they're coming here by the literally by the millions? I know in the greater Charlotte area, I think we have over like 150,000 Indians. There's entire neighborhoods not far from where I am currently sitting that the whole neighborhood, every single house in the neighborhood was bought by Indian immigrants. And while I have no problem again with them as a people, it's not, this is not a racial issue. I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian pastor, for goodness sakes. So when you import massive amounts of pagans that follow a different God, and again, the Bible is not silent about this. The Old Testament is chock full of examples of how badly this goes. When you import pagans into a Christianized land. Um, I don't think the average Christian is seeing what's happening, like I said, right underneath their noses. Could you speak to that a little bit and kind of what you're seeing there in Texas, and what you're just seeing around the country? But again, I think Texas is a good microcosm.
Yeah, yeah. So I think from a Texas perspective, we are a I think resilient state. This onslaught of changing from presidential administrations between parties, where you're kind of really callous to the ebbs and flows of the philosophical immigration issue. Let them all, like, look at the Biden administration and just let them all come in, or the extent of any resistance they would have is Kamala Harris kind of doing this half-hearted, no, don't come, please. And you're like, wink, wink, nod, nod, come is what they're really saying. And then we have another administration. Trump administration has been one of the strongest in terms of um, vocally. So I think the Trump administration does the best job from, for sure, a presenting the argument to the people. They're not like hemming and hawing of this kind of being an issue. And hey, let's not really talk about, because we don't want to be called racist or anything like that. No, they're like outspokenly the policy is that. Now the H-1B visa is a whole nother tangent that we could end up on, but I'm not too thrilled with the latest comments. I don't think anyone is from the president on that. But as a whole, Texas is kind of accustomed to that changing with the tides of presidencies. We also have an identity as a state of having our own sovereignty as a state, which is unique, I think, to the United States history. We fought for our own independence, and we joined of our own free accord to the United States. And if you ask a lot of Texans, it will be Texas first and then America first, in that order. So we have this resolve, that we recognize the threat of it, and I think when you're seeing the shift in Texas, if you look at the presidential administration from Biden to Trump, we're going redder because of it. And it's not just in your traditional areas that you would think. I mean, the Rio Grande Valley, for instance, was, so these are the people who are overwhelmingly Hispanic. They used to be considered like, we don't even really try and reach out because we know that's going to be a blue seat. Those seats are flipping on the immigration issue. So it's honestly it's egg on the Republican Party's face that we had this preconceived notion that, like, oh, but they're going to be okay with that. But then if anyone dares, like Trump, to actually, no, let's go talk to those people. Let's see what they actually think about that. They're affected by it. And all of a sudden those seats are flipping. So Texas is, while we do have the Muslim problem with the mosques growing in Texas, I think that is a separate issue in terms of sovereignty. Texas, I think, is very, very strong, and the shift of the spread of how we're going redder reflects that. I think the issue with Christians in particular is that they're not able to think in categories and separate out like their loyalty and thinking that the Constitution is one of the greatest man-made documents ever, and religious pluralism. And they feel like they have to be equally committed to that. And I don't think they would ever say this out loud, but there's almost like an allegiance to religious liberty as much as there is to scripture, it feels like sometimes, because they are advocating for the rights of religious liberty. This is most pronounced in my tradition of Baptist, that would lead them, if they goes to such an extreme, they're actually advocating for the rights of pagan gods to come in and build their houses of worship and high places, when scripture explicitly tells us, like Judges 6, will you contend for Baal? Like, if he's a god, let him contend for himself, because his altar is torn down. We're not called to advocate for the rights of false gods. And to your point of the statues being erected, if you read anything with military history or battles or like World War II history, anything like that, you'll know, like, the way all throughout human history, when people are conquered, or when you take a hill, or when you take a advantage point, what do? You tear down their signal, their flag, their whatever it is, and you erect your own. And so the symbolism is not just that, oh, they just want to have their own statue. It's, no, they're concentrating certain areas and erecting their false gods. And every Christian should reject that outright. We should never be the spokesman for why they have the right to do that.
No, it's well, and I think it's such a fundamentally anachronistic idea that we're using such 2025 lenses to look back at our founding fathers and their generation and say, well, they fought for religious liberty. They fought for religious liberty in a context they understood, which the
Mhm.
context they understood would be religious liberty meant most of the country was Protestant, and we're okay with allowing some, Catholics and some Jews in. And that would have been their entire mindset. If most of the countries, most of the 13 colonies were heavily Protestant, completely Protestant. Maryland, of course, was hence the name Mary. Maryland was Catholic. And yes, there would have been a number of Jewish families and Jewish immigrants that came over in the very beginning as well. That's the context they knew. There'd have been no understanding with our founding generation of this kind of modern idea of a pluralism as we know it, as we see it. And so this pipe dream that the left has really is they're the ones that dreamt it up, but sadly the right, and especially to your point, the Christian right has bought it hook, line, and sinker for by and large, is, well, our founding fathers wanted this, principled pluralism. And I'm like, where have you found that? Yeah, I've read a lot of the early source documents. I've got some of them sitting behind me in my bookcase. Where would you have picked that up? I mean, there's just
Mhm.
that's such an anachronistic view. You have to take a very modern lens and then place it on an ancient, a more 200 plus year old time. And I just don't think they would even understand what the world in which we're living. So that they're not writing laws with that in mind. I mean, do you think I'm
No, I mean, in fact, if you go back to the founding of our nation, what's the first war after and for independence that we got into? It was the Pirates of Tripoli, with
Yep,
Jefferson,
yep.
and the Islamic um, pirates capturing our people for trade and enslaving them. And so there was never this like, oh, but Islam could be right. We have to treat that as a just a different view. It was always an oppositional view. It was, and it bore out. So that war, the conflict between the two faiths never stopped. I think that we, intentionally through education and public education in particular, try and erase those memories to now be more accepting of manifestation of the coexist bumper sticker as we see it, which is nothing like historical Christianity.
That's right. Well, and again, for those of you that may be watching, we're talking about the pirates off the Barbary coast of kind of modern day Africa. So the Marine Corps just celebrated their 250th anniversary just like a week or two ago, and in their theme song, I mean, this is talked about, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, and it was the shores of Tripoli that we're talking about, right? I mean, that was where Muslim slavers were enslaving our people and other Europeans, and Thomas Jefferson famously said, no, no, nope, that's not okay. And so yeah, we went, and war is almost putting it, overstating it. We resolutely destroyed them, and
Yes.
in very short order. So I mean, and nothing's changed. Now it's been kind of quiet on the Western front here in the last week or so, and it's so much so that I've thought, man, maybe I need to send another email to my state representative, which I'm encouraging you all to do that are Christians. Write your representatives, write your senators. That is important for us as Christians to do. And the thing you could do right now, stop, the video pauses. Pause this video, go write your representative right now, and tell them that we need to defend Christians in places like Nigeria and the Sudan and places where Muslims are slaughtering our brothers and sisters in Christ. And President Trump, a couple of weeks ago, to his credit, did act like, hey, we're going to do something about that. And then it's been very, very quiet since then. We need to do something about it. Reach out to our Minister of War, Mr. Hegseth, and to his office. Reach out to your representatives. Let them know, especially as Christians, we are not okay with the wholesale slaughter of our people. We're just, it's not okay. We need to step up as a nation that has the strength and the will to do it, and we need to demand that ends, and ends immediately. So, and then come back and
Yep.
finish the video, please.
Yes. Yes.
So
Agreed.
tell our people what it is that you do in politics there in the state of Texas, and then kind of walk us through, because when you and I've talked offline, I was shocked to hear how low a bar for entry there is in most local politics, not just in the state of Texas, but all across the country. And honestly, it's ripe for the picking if Christian men would just step up and make themselves slightly uncomfortable. Yes, it takes a little work. Yes, it takes a little time. Just inconvenience yourself just a little bit, and I mean, we could make huge inroads, could we not?
Oh, I think that is the white pill, as they would say. I think that by design of the political system, a lot of people they don't understand how low the bar is and how much you can change at the local level that ripples all throughout your state. And so that is what I'm most passionate about. So to answer your first question, to give the audience kind of a brief history, I originally I worked in the Republican Party in two separate states, one liberal and one in Oregon, and then also in Texas. I started my political career because I was living in a 25,000 person town, and the alphabet mafia, the LGBTQ plus and whatever, we'll see, continuing that because that plus in definition is ever expanding, was trying to pressure our mayor to proclaim a transgender visibility day. And so I went in as a father, as a citizen, and I shared Christ, telling the people who had flown out of state into our small little town that how they identify as and who they're attracted to is not the truest thing about them, that Christ made them and wants them to repent and follow him, and he will set them free from the bondage they have in their sin. And so I came out of nowhere. I guess that was my first meeting that I went to in the city council. I had not lived there that long. I was a new father at the time. Walked out of the meeting, and the Republican Party chairman was happened to be there because of the media coverage, and said, "Hey, would you ever consider running to the office of city council or anything else in the state?" So I was like, did you? I have no idea what that looks like. And he's like, well, your courage is all you would need in politics. And I was like, well, are we so void of courage that like one guy showing up to a meeting of father, which I feel like the whole room should be packed with fathers in particular in that particular issue. Same with the men competing in women's sports. Fathers should be standing on the track and saying, no, your son is not going to run a sprint against my daughter, and we're going to stand here until you force the police to come remove us. So I got recruited that way by just showing up as a citizen. So that's the first step. Guys, show up. When you hear about that stuff going on in your town, go to your city council meeting. It's an hour tops. It's not going to speak boldly. You get 2 minutes on the microphone, speak boldly. You never know where the Lord's going to open the door next. I had no desire or passion, or I had no like ambition to get into politics. I should say. It's just that I just knew that was wicked, and the Lord calls us to stand up for what is good and what is light, and so that's how I started in politics. Then I got recruited and elected into city councilor. During that time, I've been in what is called a precinct chair or a precinct delegate, depending on what state you live in. I've been a state delegate, and that is the role that I've continued to serve in as I moved to Texas, both as a precinct delegate and the state delegate. And I think that's where the white pill is. And unless I think what that entails, and that most people don't know, this is the most local, smallest form of elected politics we have in our system. A precinct delegate, if you think about your county, it's gridded out into zones by population. Those are called precincts. And those zones get one representative to their county party. So I live in a specific area. I'm the precinct chair for that area. I am a voting member. I represent all the Republicans in my area in our county party. So when we pass resolutions, when we pass what we want to stand for as a party, when we pass censures, which is like a public reprimand of our elected officials that they aren't doing what they said they were going to do. We also, our job is to get Republicans elected too, so you're involved in that process as well. So I represent one chair or one voting body in my entire county. Here is the gem that I wish every one of your listeners would hear, and especially every young man who banters on X in particular about what we should be doing to correct our political system. 50% on average of those seats are vacant. Vacant. So the extent of you filling that seat is going onto your county party website, printing it out. It is one page. You turn it into your chair. You're on the ballot. If no one's in that, you're running unopposed. You have the seat. If you are running against someone, you'll run like any other ballot. 2 names on the ballot. You can go talk to your neighbors and tell them why you're the great fit for that local area and how you would represent them well. Then you are a voting member of your county party. Before I go, how it ripples up, I don't know. Do you want to pipe in or ask me any questions about that? Because I'm probably going to go on a long tangent here.
That the only that seems too easy and almost too good to be true. That I mean, just showing up and having the courage to vocalize our deeply held beliefs was enough to get the attention of one of the top Republicans in your area, who, because they're so deficiently, have such deficient manpower, and from what you've just said, that's not uncommon. So your boldness and your willingness were the only entry level things that you needed. And the guy said, man, that's it. Just do that again, like on a rinse repeat cycle, and you can basically be in local government. I mean, that seems incredible to me.
Yeah, and I think so this is a purple city. It's located outside of Portland, so it was a split council. And what I advise people on who are trying to get involved in politics and they want to talk about how Christians need to be bolder and courageous, it's a muscle. you're not going to strengthen it unless you exercise it. So we could talk all day about confronting the left and the pagan worldview, but it's something else when you're, standing in front of someone who directly hates your worldview, that you're having to hold your feet down and say, "I'm not budging. Christ says this. I'm a Christian. I'm not going to be apologetic about it. This is how I'm going to govern in a small sphere." At that point, it was a city councilor. Um, and so you're not going to kind of build your way up in your mind. I think Christians sometimes trick themselves into believing this. They read a lot of books and they think they're equipping themselves for to be able to have that grandstanding moment to stand. You you're equipping yourself by actually going through the exercise of standing in that opposition. By like I ran the booth here in a very conservative part of Texas with my 4-year-old son, and a crazy unhinged leftist comes, drops f bombs and screams at me in front of my son. I bring my son to those events because I want him to see that. I want him to see
Yeah.
that. What's wrong with her? She hates Christ. She's far from Christ, and Christ needs to save her. And she I want him to witness that. But if we just kind of recluse from that and we just get the head knowledge, when the time comes, you're not going to be ready. And so yeah, it's very very low entry, and for the precinct chair in particular, it's in the off season. You're meeting once a quarter for maybe an hour and a half. Once a quarter, hour and a half. On election, monthly for maybe an hour and a half. You do have extra responsibilities of when you're you get to have a big influence on the types of representatives that you get representing you when they're running to actually be the candidate. You're a massive part of that, and then you are helping them get elected, especially if they're running opposed against a Democrat in an area that's like purple. You are part of that team that's helping them get across the finish line and get them on. Where that ripples into massive, like I say, it's a ripple effect in a pond. The precinct chair does all those things locally. They're also the ones who can hold your elected officials accountable. So, like my representative, for example, our party, if he runs on he's pro Second Amendment and that he participates in a gun grabbing law and trying to, then we can censure him and say, you actually you violated the platform in which the Republicans stand for. If he does that,
Meaning that you're holding him accountable,
yes,
or in I mean, some states it's a her, obviously, or some locales it's going to be a him or a her, but you're
mhm,
holding that representative accountable to what they said from the stump were platform positions they were going to hold. And I mean, let's
yep,
be honest, who among us has not had that complaint at some point where we've said, all these rhinos that say one thing, talk out of one side of their mouth, and then go and do another. Again, I'm in North Carolina, and one of my favorite rhino punching bags is just one state south of me with Lindsey
um,
Graham.
yeah,
So I mean, Lindsey Graham's right. Just a state away, and I mean that he is, as far as I'm concerned, I hear that name, I see his face, and I just see a rhinoceros. I mean, it's
yep,
it's just like, yep, there he is. I mean, that is the
yep,
epitome of what one of these guys is. So
yep,
the idea of being able to hold them accountable at such a granular level of, hey, you said that these were the positions you would live up to, and you're not. So I mean,
yep.
that's just pure old fashioned accountability.
Yeah, and in Texas, it's a fight right now because we actually put some teeth in this censure. So if a representative has X amount of censures in their term, meaning they violated the platform of the Republican Party of Texas, the values that we go to a state convention and say, this is what we stand for, this is what we believe in, and this is what you're agreeing to run as a Republican. If they do that enough times, they can be disqualified in the next election cycle by running as a Republican. They can run as an independent. They can outrun as a Republican. The only way that happens is at the county level. We only have the authority to censure our representative. No one else in the state can do it. The county can. that he represents. So usually he or she represents, two or three counties in their district. So someone within their district, the Republican Party has to initiate the censure. It then goes to the state party, and they say, "Hey, they censured him. Is this legitimate?" They review all the facts, and they say, "Yes, that's legitimate." If they say that's legitimate, if he gets, I believe it's he or she gets three of them in his current term, then next election cycle they can't run as a Republican. Um, so talk about accountability and localism and actually affecting change. You are the initiator to that accountability, that no one else has the ability to do that from an individual representative level. No one else can. San Antonio can't censure my representative in East Texas. We can, though, if they decide to not uphold their values that they agreed to. So where that ripples, though, is that I said that they violate the state platform. The state platform, this is also a seat that I hold, is a state delegate. So state delegates are uh, made up primarily, but not only, of precinct delegates located throughout the entire state. So there's a state convention held every year where we bring forth what we believe we should stand for as a party. It gets debated at the state convention. We adopt it or we don't. It's quite the ordeal. I think that I would love to see some more coverage on those types of events, especially from Christian content creators, so that you can really see what is being debated and what conservatives believe and what they don't believe, and kind of the mixed bag of that. Um, but precinct chairs make up state delegates for the most part, not exclusively, but for the most part. So if you were to fill your county with Christians, and they're all the precinct chairs, and then you said, "Oh, state convention is coming up. Who are going to be our state delegates?" Those same Christians go to the state convention, and they're the ones bringing forth what the Republican Party, in my case, Texas, is supposed to believe and stand for. What kind of proposals and resolutions are we as Christians called to bring forth? Ones that are light and righteous and represent the God that we serve. And those will be what are debated on the floor. So it is once some of those or all of them get adopted, that becomes the Republican platform. That is the basis of which representatives have to agree to represent you on, or face the consequences and not be able to run as a Republican next time if they don't. So it is a massive local to state ripple and a straight line of how we can influence our states if we just show up.
Now, let me ask a kind of the next tier, even higher than that. So, when say the RNC happens, wherever it ends up, happening on any given year, if it's
Mhm.
in a state in which you're working, then obviously you're going to be boots on the ground. You're going to be involved because, I mean, that's such a huge event. They need all of the local support and help they can get. But even if it's in, say, another state, you work there in Texas, and it's in, Chicago, for lack of a better
Mhm.
term, and you do see, when you watch the RNC or the DNC for that matter on television, that every state has sent delegates.
Yep.
So is that part of also what you're talking about? Is these same state level delegations then also would go to a national level convention and represent your various states, even
Yep.
at those types of things too?
Yep. Some of my closest brothers in arms, I say, at the county level. I did not go this last go around because we were young children and it didn't work out. But one of my closest brothers in arms and a couple other good patriots and Christians from my county were our representatives from the state of Texas and went to that.
I mean, so for those of you watching, that it doesn't get, yeah, I mean, you are rubbing shoulders at that point with the movers and shakers of your party. So it is an incredible thing to think that it's such a low bar of entry. You could have, uh, you could sit at dinner across from someone that really is going to be a policymaker and get to actually have a conversation, get to actually influence their course of thought on any given topic. And again, you brought up something kind of in passing there that I think sometimes we're aware of and sometimes we pleasantly ignore. The tent in the Republican world has gotten very large,
Yes.
very large.
Yep.
When I watched the RNC, I made an entire video on the RNC last time. when Trump was running for a second term. Um, and I talked about how I'm of the opinion it's too big. I mean that because that now the tent in the Republican world, which you always want to have a certain size, of acceptance that you say, hey, we can, the old adage is the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and there is some truth to that. But when you start having such polar opposites as certain like foundational fundamental lifestyle choices, again like religion, and
Mhm.
I'm thinking of some of the Christless conservatism, that
Yep.
you get, again, I would say even with guys like Ben Shapiro or the guy that's on the Daily Wire who's the homosexual, and him and his husband have uh, um, and I cannot remember his name all of a sudden.
Is it
Dave
Reuben?
Rubin, pardon me. Yeah, Dave
Yep.
Rubin.
Yep.
That's just Christless conservatism, and that doesn't win the day. That doesn't. It certainly doesn't get us an America that I want to see. And
Hmm.
or then you think of like Harmeet Dillon, who not only was at the RNC last time, but gave a prayer at the RNC. I don't need Harmeet Dillon's pagan prayer. I mean,
Yep.
it's and I know what some folks watching this are going to think. Well, you know what? Then Franklin Graham got up and prayed, and I don't need his prayer. Fair enough. But I am a minister of the Word of God. I am a PCA pastor and a minister of the Word of Jesus Christ, and I make no apologies for it. I want Franklin Graham. If someone in this nation is going to wield power, and make no mistake, someone will wield power because power is real. It does
Hmm.
exist, and someone gets to have it. I want it to be us, and I make no bones about it. I make no apologies for it. I would rather it be me and mine. I want it to be Christians. Now, again, because of the world in which we're living, some of you are going to hit the comments and say, "Oh, so you want it to be, all whites?" I didn't say any of that. I want it to be Christians. It doesn't have. They don't have to look just like me. I do want them to believe like me, though. So
Yep.
whether they are white Christians, black Christians, Hispanic Christians, Korean Christians. I mean, I'm in the PCA. The largest group of people in the PCA outside of historically Southern whites are Koreans. We have a humongous Korean contingent in the PCA, and Brazilians are coming up quickly behind them. Cool. It can be
Yep.
Korean Christians, it can be Brazilian Christians, but by goodness, I want it to be Christians.
Yep.
So I think the more comfortable, to your point that you said earlier, the more comfortable we get with that kind of thinking, with that kind with verbalizing that and saying, I'm not embarrassed by it. I mean, my goodness, if the left doesn't blush at the idea that a man can get pregnant, or that transgendered weirdos should be reading kids' books at the library, or fill in the blank with all of their other just insane derelict ideas that they're peddling, then why in the world should the most normal, traditional, right wing Christian people in the world feel at all embarrassed about our very boilerplate standard Christian beliefs? I can't understand why we feel embarrassed when the weirdest people on earth are like letting their freak flags fly.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it's largely, I mean, it's because we've kind of been conditioned that those two things are separate, right? And so I always, I kind of view it as a common thread with like writing the book and being involved in politics is like it's all like I try and aim everything towards inheritance. That's like constantly what's on my mind as a father. So like what are the values we're instilling in our children? Are we being faithful to Deuteronomy 6? Are we are we catechizing our children? And then are we also building for their inheritance institutionally, culturally, and doing those things? Those two, they're not divorced from one another. We've tricked ourselves. The left, honestly, is the one that fed us this narrative when we bought it hook, line, and sinker. They're not separate. And actually, you exemplify and you display, you live out your faith on the stage of these places that your children witness you in those arenas. Like I've mentioned my son coming to the air show with me and actually being confronted, and he witnessed that. If we are like separating those two things, then it's no wonder it's going to be filled. Those seats are there, like you said, power is there. They exist. The structure in our civilization, from whether we're talking about local parties or state conventions or national conventions, There's X amount of seats. Who ought they to be filled with? Because if you say like, oh, that's beneath us, we're removed from it, they'll be filled with someone. They'll be filled with someone who hates your ideology, who wants to see Christianity destroyed within both parties. I mean, it's the one thing I am most optimistic about the Republican Party is that I've never been to a meeting where we didn't start with prayer on any local level. We recognize God, we recognize the Creator, and it is in Jesus' name that we pray at every local meeting that I have ever been to. So, what are we going to do with that blessing that the Lord has given us? There's a party that at least acknowledges Him publicly in our forums, and now there's X amount of seats that that party is going to give to be a voice for the people. Are we going to fill them? And that's why I'm tremendously optimistic that as Christians kind of shed the fallacies that we believed in terms of those separations, and we look forward towards reforming our country and bringing it back to its explicitly Protestant Christian roots, we realize that we have to fill those seats. And now I think it's our job to let Christians know, how do you do that? What's a tangible, easy, simple way to do it? And this is one of them. This is the lowest hanging bar. One page, you'll show up on a ballot. Don't worry, your employer probably won't ever see that you showed up on a ballot. We're talking about your county at the very end of the ticket. You're probably running unopposed. You show up to a meeting once a month. Then you go to state convention if you want to do that. If you don't, if you're like, I want to stay local, good. At least you're involved. You're in it. There's tremendous opportunity, and our young men in particular, we have witnessed the fruit of being absent in these spheres. We have inherited it, and we will also leave the inheritance for our children. Will we repeat? Will we complain? Will we just say, oh, look at everything's societally, look what we inherited. This isn't fair. You didn't pick these fights. Those things might be true. They might. I'm going to be charitable and say half of them aren't, but some of them are. But guess what? It does not matter. God put you in this time and place for a reason. He equipped you for this time. You can go change it. Will you continue that to your children's generation? Will you leave them the same inheritance that you right now are so frustrated that you have? Or will you get up and do something about it? And I am thankful that the Lord has put men in my life, and He's continuing to put men in my life that encourage me to do the latter. And I want to encourage all your listeners, especially men, go do it.
No. Amen. Amen. I action items, and again, all of you that watch my channel regularly, you know that my whole thrust of this ministry, my tagline, for goodness sakes, is practical theology for everyday life. It does not get any more practical than boots on the ground, American governance, and I do mean that. This is the idea that America pushed forward 250 years ago, roughly, was novel in all the history of the world. You know, that a people could govern herself. You know, that we could govern ourselves and have representatives that would faithfully represent us before the higher echelons of government. It really has been an incredible thing that the rest of the world still never buy this leftist talking point that the world, there are aspects of the world, parts of the world that may hate America, but it isn't because of that. You know, the rest of the world, and especially those that are the huddled masses clinging to hope of a better tomorrow, they still look at America and say, wow, I wonder what that's like. I wonder what it's like to govern yourselves. I wonder what it's like to have a seat at the table. So I mean, don't black pill, guys, that we still live in an incredibly free nation that is ripe for the taking if we will just be brave enough to step up and do what our founding fathers did, which is boldly create for ourselves something that is worth salvaging. So America's worth saving, our denominations are worth saving, all of the institutions that our forebears gave themselves for are still out there. It's, will this generation take them? And I love what you said about, we were brought to this time for such a thing. I mean, we quote that passage out of Queen Esther's story, and that's just the most prescient example, perhaps. My wife and I were talking this morning, and we'll close with this. My wife and I were talking this morning about if you were Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego's parents, and you knew what was going to happen to those four boys, would you have done everything in your power to stop it? Or maybe even have said, maybe we just shouldn't have kids in such a difficult time. Maybe it's not right to bring kids into such a difficult world. I mean, because we hear Christians, say stuff like that today. I don't know that I could have kids or bring kids into this. Just look how messy things are. And thank God that those four men's parents had them. And when Babylon came and they conquered them and they carried those boys off into slavery, thank God those men stayed faithful even on the south side of that. And so that when Nebuchadnezzar flexed, those three boys could say, "No, O king, that our God is able to save us, but even if he doesn't, we will not bow to you." And then to know that Daniel's story is even the next level of kind of crazy and kind of the next depth down of this man would go on to advise Nebuchadnezzar and then Darius after that. I mean, what if he had not been faithful? What if his parents had decided to not teach him about Yahweh? I mean, it's so that how important is it that we pass this on? That inheritance idea is just it's so key. To leave for your children something that's worth value that they can actually take and use, whether that's yes, it's going to be monetary, yes, it's going to be something like, but my goodness, it better be spiritual. So, JT, thank you so very much for arranging to come on. I'm so encouraged by what you're doing in all of the various aspects of your work. Um, your book is incredible. I highly recommend. Let my people know where they can find that. If you want to read a wonderful, unflinchingly strong and encouraging fictional story that you can read to your kids, because my kids enjoyed it. Where can they go get your book?
Uh, I appreciate that, Corey. Here it is one more time for everyone to see. It's Tales of Calvaria, A Trial of Kings. You can find it at knoxandwest.com, where you can also find our blog specifically for biblical masculinity and fatherhood. You can find it on Amazon as well. So Tales of Calvaria should bring it up. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I don't know, once you start writing, and I strongly recommend fathers at the very least, try and write your own or create your own bedtime stories for your sons in particular. Because once you start looking at the lens of creating a character like our Father created us, and you want them to instill certain virtues and values, and you are writing it on out into a story, you start to like really internally look at yourself and say, what kind of character am I? What if I were someone to write a story about my life? What would they write? And when you kind of have that perspective that writing gives you in this sense, and fiction has been a massive blessing in that, it allows you to kind of look in the mirror a little bit differently and say, I'm in God's story right now. He wrote me into it. And what kind of character am I? And if you don't like it, if you don't really are proud of some parts, or maybe you've shrunk back, today is a new day. Go on, march forward, be the character that you want your sons and children to read about and you want them to become.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, buddy, thank you for being here today. And of course, I thank a big thank you to all of you that support my work here at Civically Minded, that watch the channel. Leave a comment and a like, subscribe. Please send this to somebody who you think it might bless. I really do read all the comments. You can also find me on all the socials at Civically Minded. And until next time, as always, I'm your host, Corey Wing. And please remember, be brave, be bold, and be civically minded. God bless.